We got some folks coming in, so welcome. Happy Tuesday. Good to see everybody. Thanks for spending some of your time with us today. My name is Karen Houghton, and I'm an investment advisor for nonprofits. I'm an author of Funding Your Mission, and I'm the founder and CEO of Infinite Giving, where we help nonprofits like you build real financial strength, managing reserves, investing long-term funds, and accepting non-cash gifts like stock or crypto and donor advised funds. So here's something that we see all the time at Infinite Giving. An organization works incredibly hard to win a grant. There's excitement, maybe some relief, and then almost immediately that focus shifts to execution and paperwork. The grant gets managed as it should, but it doesn't always get stewarded. And today we're talking about that gap because what you do after that gap is awarded often matters more than what you did to win it. Maybe. I'm joined today by two really awesome humans who live in this space professionally. Pam and Marc are the founders of Empreinte Consulting, and together they've helped nonprofits move from simply managing grants to building the kind of funder relationships that last. Pam and Marc, I'm so glad you both are here to join us today. Would either of you like to do a quick introduction?
Thanks so much, Karen. We're thrilled to be here. Marc Misiurewicz, CEO and founder of Empreinte, as you said, and this is an important topic that we've been talking a lot about lately, so appreciate the forum to discuss amongst your attendees. Hi, Karen. Thanks for having us. I'm Pam Ayers, and I'm the Executive Vice President of Strategic Initiatives for Empreinte. And grants have been my world for quite a long time. So I'm excited to talk about how to take it, from winning it to stewarding it.
Absolutely. Well, glad to have you. And Marc, we were just joking about this right before we went live on the name of Empreinte. And I love how you said it. So tell us where the name of your consulting company comes from.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. So empreinte is the French word for footprint or imprint. And I've always felt that philanthropy allows us to leave our mark on the earth, the idea of a footprint in the sand. And my mom is from New Orleans. I was raised with a Cajun French culture and really wanted to offer an homage to my mom and to the idea and culture of giving back. And empreinte just felt well. So um, we often have to answer that question. People have a tough time saying it. So appreciate you asking.
Yes, well, now we can all remember. So, Empreinte Consulting, which is fun. All right, and today, as we continue in this conversation, we want it to be candid. We want it to be helpful to everyone who's tuning in. So, we will be accepting questions throughout that conversation today. So, don't forget to enter them in the Q&A box. So that is open for you, and we will keep an eye out and we'll do our best to address them as they come. All right. Well, with that, let's go ahead and get started. Let's start with that moment most of our audience hopefully knows well. When that award email comes in, it's a good news email, there's celebration. And then, of course, the Monday morning arrives. And then we're all immediately worrying about deliverables, timelines, reporting deadlines. In y'all's experience, what tends to get dropped in those first few weeks after a grant comes in?
I think from my experience, Karen, one of the big mistakes is treating the win as sort of the finish line instead of seeing it as the starting block. So switching your brain around that is really important because that's the beginning, right? And I think a lot of times development teams or grant writing teams sort of get the win and they throw it over the wall to the program folks. And the program folks aren't always, in an ideal state, the program folks are involved in planning for the grant from day one. That's not always the case, either because they don't have the time and capacity, or it's just not part of the process. And so if the program staff wasn't involved in putting the proposal together, they might struggle executing it. If the development team is just like, we won, here you go, take it from here. So that's a big miss in my view. I think also, when we don't set up real-time tracking, so we only look at data when the report is due, I think that's another mistake. So setting up that real-time tracking on day one is really important. And sometimes that involves reaching out to the funder and actually talking through, here's what we said we'd do in the proposal. Does this really fit with what you're looking to demonstrate? And you also then get a chance to build a relationship with the funder right from the beginning, not just signing that contract and sending it in, but actually having a conversation. Mark, do you have anything to
It's
add?
yeah, I was gonna say it's like that relationship, right? Where we're applying, there feels like a big power differential, right? And then we get the good news, and then we're in the weeds of making sure what we need to do happens, but we almost forget about that relationship side of things.
Yes, exactly.
And then
Yeah,
Mark, I know, yeah, you're on like the operational side. What do you
yeah, and yeah, the relationship side is critically important and something that we focus on. And I think to build on Pam's point, a lot of organizations don't think about the next steps. They think about applying for the grant, they think about winning the grant, but then it's the what's next. And throughout this whole process, relationships should be a key focus. It's important that nonprofits don't think of grant funders as this behind the curtain Wizard of Oz type of relationship. They're human beings, whether it's a corporate foundation, a public entity, or a private foundation, there are human beings making decisions. And building relationships with those human beings advances the engagement, advances the impact, and allows it to be more sustainable than just a win for a grant and then move on to the next. So that's another piece that a lot of organizations lose sight of post award is now we need to cultivate, we need to steward, we need to work with the funders to help them understand you and the impact that you're having through their award.
So if it were you and or someone you are advising and they get the money in, they're starting to work on the program, what are the first like two or three things you would recommend that they do towards the funder, right? Like they've got the program, they've got all of this. What are those first couple of things they should do? I mean, you're acknowledging the gift, then what?
And I think one of the things that I like to think about doing is how do we form that connection, not just an acknowledgement letter, but an actual conversation. So I love, especially if you have a program where there's something really neat going on site, in addition to that letter thanking them, invite them to see what's going on, invite them into the program, because that really connects the funder with the actual people that are being served, the activities that are happening. And I've seen so many organizations that invite funders in get multi-year awards in the end because the funder ends up feeling really connected to the work and connected to the folks that are doing the work and the folks that are receiving the services.
Yeah, don't take a robotic approach. I mean, much like you meet an individual donor, treat that funder uniquely. Don't have cookie cutter thank you letters. Have your CEO, program manager, write a personal note on the thank you letter. Again, to Pam's point, invite them in to see, or have a virtual meeting where you can show them a little bit of what's happening, but offer the opportunity to build a connection. Too many times, grant funders are treated transactionally. And to Pam's point, that could limit your ability to receive additional funding down the road, whether it's the next year or 2 years down the road. And more funders are considering multi-year grants when they've established a relationship and they see the impact. So we really strongly recommend that you take each unique relationship as such and don't create this robotic cookie cutter follow-up, but understand what they care about, what they want to see, what their expectations are.
And who typically owns that process? I know every organization is a little different. A lot of our smaller organizations are outsourcing the grant writing. So once it comes in-house, is that development? Is that the executive director? Is that the finance team? Who do you all usually see owning that relationship?
I think it really does depend on the organization in terms of size and capacity. A small organization, it's probably going to be the executive director, quite honestly. A larger organization with bigger services and programs, it might be the program manager or program director or the COO. It just depends on who can speak most directly to the services and programs that are happening and do it, with a level of sophistication that can meet the funder where they are and be able to talk about success. What's our success? What's your success? And being able to have that conversation. Not all organizations have a development team, but development folks tend to be able to have that conversation that, stewards along a funder and treats them, more like a partner. Anybody that can do that and also speak to the actual outcomes of the program and the intentions of the program, I think is the right person.
I love that answer because it gives flexibility. Because I know a lot of organizations, there's not always a single owner of the funder relationship because it can be finance, it can be program staff, and they sometimes operate a little more in silos than they should. So making sure that it's cross-functional and that all sides are really understanding the full impact.
I
Yeah,
will say
Karen.
that, oh, go
Oh,
ahead, Mark.
I was just going to say that's another misstep that a lot of organizations make is protecting the relationship, where the executive director, CEO might say, I'm the only one who can talk to the funder. Well, what happens when that person transitions? I mean, we're seeing high rates of turnover in the nonprofit space. If the funder knows multiple leaders in the organization, there's a higher level of comfort. Where if there's transition, we're not going to miss a step. We're still going to maintain the relationship. The program's going to move forward. So thinking more broadly about multiple points of contact and who all adds value to the relationship is critically important.
Yes, there's a lot of danger when all hats are hung on just one person, for sure.
I
Uh,
will make a little bit of a plug for some sort of CRM where you can communicate with each other about who has those relationships and what the most recent point of contact, what happened with that. Because one danger is if there are numerous points of contact, if those folks internally aren't speaking to each other or sharing, what's been going on with that funder, it can get a little bit messy. So I'm a big fan of a good CRM, but even just making sure that you have consistent communication between your team members is really important.
Absolutely. And Mark, you mentioned you know, repeating grants sometimes, right? Where you can get one and then sometimes you get another. And if you're able to prove it out and prove that you've stewarded it well and you've handled and cultivated the relationship well, how often does that happen? Because dare I say that's probably quite motivating for many of us of saying, okay, if we put in this time, we're not putting in the time for that, but that is certainly a hopeful outcome that additional funding would happen. You said you see an increase in that. How much does that happen these days?
We are seeing an increase, and both regionally, we're in upstate New York, but then across the country, funders are looking differently. They don't want to become relied upon, and so there's this balancing act of saying we understand that you might need a couple of years runway to show the impact of this program. We're not going to be here forever, so we want you to be sustainable. But having that conversation to say, too many times a grant is received and it costs the organization money because that $100,000 they received requires an investment afterwards to then sustain. And so funders are starting to see if we give you 3 years of funding, you're going to have more sustainability, more continuity in the program, and then that leads to greater impact. And ultimately, the funders are really focused on impact. They want to serve as many people, help as much as possible, and over time they can do that. That comes from the relationship. So when impact and relationship gel, that's when wonderful things can happen. And so, we recommend not to be bashful, to talk about. Now, it requires that you have a multi-year vision for the organization. So, do you have a strategic plan? Is it multi-year? Do you can show why this program is important and multiple year funding is vital? When you have that and then you build the relationship, you're showing the impact, that formula is powerful. And the funders are resonating to it because they really they want to make the difference and not just, give a short win and then hope for the best.
hmm And that's a big piece, right? When we talk about organizations and the grants, there is all that work. There's a lot of compliance around it. Like you have to hit deadlines, you have to do the reporting. And occasionally we have talked to folks who are like, hey, we did everything right, but somehow they still weren't funded again. And I think that's often where it's like, hey, it's compliance, yes, but also that kind of partnership and relationship cultivation is a big piece of it. Do you think they're kind of equally weighted?
I think so. Compliance is important, but I think what I've seen a lot is when a very compliant organization that's lacking relationships leans too hard on the compliance, they kind of miss the opportunity to like speak to failure. So sometimes things don't go as you planned. Sometimes the best proposal in the world doesn't roll out as expected because something in the environment changed, something in your staffing changed, who knows? So if you don't have a relationship, then you don't have the flexibility around those snags to be ahead of it and talk to the funder honestly and share what the pain points are and talk about here's what we need to do to pivot. We're still going to hit our metrics, but we have to do it differently, or we can't hit our metrics because X, Y, and Z happened. And at the end of the day, funders are human beings. They understand that things change. But if you're not talking to them consistently and if you only see them as a check or, an entity to which you send a report, they can't understand in real time what's going on and how they might even be able to support those pivot moments. And we've seen this in the last year and a half, right? Lots of things have changed, and it's required organizations to pivot the way they're using their more flexible funding to cover gaps. There's just so much going on. And if you're not talking to your funders regularly, they just might see it as failure and you're not going to get that renewal. But if they know, then they see themselves as a partner and they want to see that success.
And that's, the communication is so key. We can't emphasize this enough because there shouldn't be any surprises. If they don't fund you another year, you should know that's their expectation if they're not going to fund you another year. It shouldn't be, I don't understand why. And, really the highly functioning funders that we're familiar with are engaged. They are checking in. And the nonprofits are also stewarding that in a way where they're communicating regularly. When that happens, then there aren't surprises. And if a funder says you're getting 1 year of funding and then the rest is on you, you need to know that. So ask those questions. Be very clear and don't live in this nebulous world of wondering. There should never be a question. Reach out, communicate, ask the hard questions, be clear on expectations, and then there shouldn't be any surprises along the way.
In that communication cadence, is it monthly? Is it annually? Is it weekly? I know everybody's a little bit different, but what's a general recommendation on how much they should be reaching out?
Monthly is the right cadence in my mind. It's kind of check-in and it could be email. It could be a quick virtual meeting, a phone call. It doesn't necessarily need to be extensive. Once a year is not enough. Every week is too much. And part of that too is the communication of understanding, what is it that you're looking for, funder? How often should I communicate with you? What are some of the benchmarks that we reach that I should make you aware of? So again, understanding all of that. Again, Pam alluded to this earlier. It's you get the award letter, you send the thank you letter, and then you're off and running. Well, setting the stage to when stewarding and thanking, clarify expectations makes life easier. But monthly feels appropriate in most cases, depending on the size of the grant and the expectations of the reporting.
And I think that's where sometimes we all can get stuck where we're like, okay, I'm communicating. There's so much pressure. This is really important. I'm going to make a big glossy notebook of like all of these beautiful things. And then sometimes taking that pressure off and just reminding us it's a relationship doesn't mean you can't also do those things, but sometimes a quick call, hey, I'm standing here, I'm watching this happening. You're a part of this. Thank you so much. We talk about at Infinite Giving a lot of times in the framework of inspiring generosity. Like, how are we building relationships where we're just inspiring generosity? And I think that's even though grants feel more like programs and more formal, and there's compliance issues and requirements, it's still ultimately that relationship and maybe removing some pressure to do more casual relational touch bases is a good idea. What do you think?
Well, I think more and more funders are interested in the quantitative data, so collecting that and reporting on it is important. But the
Yeah.
qualitative stuff is the hard stuff that makes a lot of funders interested in giving in the first place. I think about, like when my kids were little and somebody would give us a gift, taking a picture of my kid playing with that toy or wearing that outfit and sending it to them and saying, "Oh my gosh, thank you so much. This is so cute." It's not much different than that, right? You get this money from a funder and you want them to see it in action, and nobody's going to scoff at that. They're going to be happy to see that they're actually making a difference. And wow, there's, a building we help to build or a person who we help to get to work or whatever the case may be. Those qualitative touch points really, really go a long way.
Yeah.
And don't lose sight of, the source. I mean, this is something that's consistent because We have a lot of clients that receive public funding, and they've built very meaningful relationships with legislators, elected officials, and staff within those offices. So just because it's a public grant doesn't mean that somehow now there's this barrier. These are still people that are making decisions. Whether it's a corporate foundation, there are people making decisions, or if it's a private family foundation, that even goes more so because many times the private family foundations are more heart and less, quantitative. Regardless of the source, this process we've seen work very effectively. And the highly effective funders are looking for it. The highly effective nonprofits are engaging in it, and that leads to really powerful impact along the way.
Yeah. All right, let's connect grants to financial strategy. So this is a territory that I think is underexplored in the grant world, and it definitely connects directly to what we do at Infinite Giving. So when we think about grants, they're usually treated as like project by project funding, right? They're actually part of a much bigger financial picture. And we think about bringing the money in, but there's not a lot of time spent on how we manage that funding, right? So once it hits, where does it sit? How long does it take to deploy? What happens to unspent dollars? All of these things have real strategic implications. So, how do you all help organizations start thinking about grants as part of their overall financial strategy rather than as this separate bucket? And where should those funds sit?
This is a whole nother hour-long webinar, and I'm glad
I
you
know.
brought it up, Karen. But it's a great, great question, and it's important. So for us, it starts at the beginning. We referenced a strategic plan. So understanding your entirety of the organization and funding sources that are needed and for what. Then it translates into an actionable plan of finance and development and programs working together. Many times those departments don't speak the same language. So having, team conversations and level setting on how it's going to be managed before you apply for the grant. So again, this is the sequence that's often out of order is
Mhm.
organizations will apply for a grant, then get it, then try to figure out their strategic plan and their financing structure. Start with that planning. Take the time to invest in the planning and understand that grants is one subset of potential revenue. You have annual unrestricted giving, major gifts, you have realized plan gifts. You could have an endowment that's spinning off interest and proceeds. You could have earned revenue from portions of your programs. There's event revenue, there's sponsorship, there's all these different sources. So what does that pie look like for your organization? And be thoughtful in your planning, bring the right people together from finance, from leadership, and from programs so there's understanding of how it's going to be used. And again, back to what are the expectations? Is this a reimbursement grant where we're going to have to front some money for 6 months before we get the reimbursement? Or is this money that we're just going to get outright? So understanding that piece. But internal communication, thoughtful strategy, and planning is critical to understanding that grants are one piece of the overall puzzle.
Mm,
And
well
I'll
said.
just add, that front end planning and being really strategic about that financial picture also helps you avoid the mission drift that happens when you're desperate for funding and you think that grants are your silver bullet. And so people start throwing spaghetti at the wall and going for things that aren't necessarily good fit. So from my vantage point as a grants professional, I always advise people to think about being true to what you do and looking for funding that fits that rather than trying to fit what you do to what the funder's looking for.
Yeah. And I have like when on the infinite giving side, we often sit at this intersection where I've got two anecdotal stories that I'll share. And one was an organization in the Northeast, actually not too far from you guys, and they got a $350,000 grant. And they were told, hey, if you manage this well over the next 12 months, we will do another check-in. And if you've been able to grow it and deploy it, we will give you another $500,000. So
Mm,
huge opportunity.
sure.
They did not get the other $500,000. And one of the reasons is they let that $350,000 sit in their checking account slash low yield savings account in their bank for a year. really good people, great intentions. The board got stuck, right? They were like, well, we don't know and we don't understand risk and we're doing what's safe and so we're going to plan and maybe deploy a little, right? But they didn't really get it to work, either the money for itself and or deploying it for these programs. And they thought they were doing this safe thing. But the reality is, once you look at inflation and other things that were going on, once they were ready to deploy it, the money had already lost value.
Yeah.
And so they were so sad and disappointed. And I was like, yes, like,
You
wait,
didn't you
you
didn't have a
can't leave
plan.
that there. So there's an element when we talk about stewardship and we talk about funding, it's the money can't just come in and sit in a checking account. Like if you're going to deploy it in the next 60, 90 days, great. Yes, do that. Most grants are deployed over time, right? Even if it's over a year, even or it's over 2 years. Another example I have is of a children's museum that we serve. Brilliant team. Their finance team is amazing. And they were like, great, we have a 2-year grant. And they were like, we want to, here's what we're deploying in the next, 6 to 12 months. Here's what we're deploying in the 12 to 18 months, and then the 18 to 24 months. And they made a plan, and that allowed them to place these funds in conservative, highly liquid, low risk holdings where they have created an extra, $150,000 by stewarding the funds that they were given so well that they had extra funds that then are now funding extra programs. And those funders are so excited about that that ideally that's going to increase their opportunity to then fund more things. So often it's that idea of like, wait, we're not talking about going all in on Microsoft or Tesla,
Right,
right? We're
right.
just talking about, ooh, could you do a money market or some treasury bills and do something with a lot of intention that even though it's a short period of time, you're able to steward those funds in a way that increases your impact even more. Do you guys have any stories like that of success
Oh.
or failure? Right? There's so many, but I think
Again, we
anecdotally,
could.
sometimes it's helpful to, because people can identify like, yeah, that sounds like my board, or that sounds like, we did do that well, or maybe we missed the boat there.
Yeah, and I think it does start in our perspective. It starts with recruitment of board members who
Mhm.
understand their duties and have expertise that can offer appropriate fiscal stewardship. Too many times we've run into chairs of the finance committee who have no background in finance. They were willing and able to do it. Maybe they, were the treasurer at their church, and so they understand finances in their mind. But it's really positioning your organization to have the best possible resources at the board level. If you have an internal finance team, and if not, have an external partner. It's amazing how many organizations don't have documented investment policies or don't review their investment policies. So really, it goes back to the planning and having that checklist of what are the things that we need to focus on. Are we prepared to take on the responsibility of a large grant like that and handle it appropriately? And if we get it, there's a great story of a philanthropist here who said, if I gave you $5 million today, what would you do with it? And it's a test because he's asking, are you prepared to handle that? And we had another situation where philanthropists gave a significant amount of money through stock. And there were organizations who weren't equipped to transition to, they didn't have brokerage accounts. So it's the planning on the upfront. It's surrounding yourself with experts internally and externally that ensure you have the proper safeguards, proper policies, proper procedures, because there's so many stories of mishandling finances, not out of malice, but out of ineptitude or lack of understanding.
Absolutely. And we do that a lot too, where we've had clients who've received, grants from Mackenzie Scott, Bezos Foundation. They're coming in as shares. And they're
Yeah.
like, oh, I'm like, yes, you need a brokerage account. You can't use a pass through for a foundation or a grant giver, right? And then what do you do? And we've even helped clients like say, here's your IPS, here's your financial plan for how you're stewarding that money until, and then we've had to help them release that before they even get the grant. So having a right partner, and to your point, the infrastructure in place. All right, I have one last question. I know we're coming up on time. Uh, For any nonprofit leader listening today, say they just received a grant this month, or they know they're going to get it, or they're praying and crossing their fingers that they're going to get one soon. What's one thing that you would each tell them they've got to do in the first 30 days?
Marc, you want to go first?
Really, I'm repeating myself, but have a plan in place for post-award. What are the steps? Who's taking them? And who is going to help manage the relationship? Just be clear. If you have to document it, document it. But don't wing it. Don't think, well, we'll figure that out if we get the grant. Take the time to be thoughtful and plan. And because they're going to be testing you, the funders are looking for responses, how you respond. And those that are thoughtful and have the steps in place are, more likely to receive future funding.
And I think mine, I agree with Marc, and that would have been the first thing I would have said. The second thing I would say is this is a chance to reach out to the funder, whoever sends you that letter or email saying, congrats, you won, and say, we're thrilled to start this work with you. Before we start anything formal, I'd love to get on a call for 15 minutes and just understand what success looks like to you so we can make sure that we're on the same page and we're providing you everything you need. They might say we want a feel-good story for our board. That's very different from we want to see the metrics and we want to see impact of 150 people in the community, or maybe it's both, but understanding that from the beginning is really important.
Well said. I love both of those. And mine would probably be let's make sure those grant dollars are sitting somewhere smart while you're deploying them. Even short term, there's better options than a zero interest checking account or a low yield savings account. Pamela, Pam, and Marc, thank you both so much. This is exactly the kind of conversation I hoped it would be. I think and hope that all the people listening are enjoying it as well. So to learn more about Empreinte Consulting, please visit their website. And you guys want to give your website real quick?
So it's empreinteconsulting.com, and you can see the spelling. So hopefully you don't have to worry about that. But you can find us there.
Wonderful. And of course, if you'd like to talk with our team at Infinite Giving about building financial strength alongside your grant strategy, you can always book a free consultation with us on our website, infinitegiving.com. So thank you everyone for being here today, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, Karen.
Thank you, Karen.